was once a feared Viking warrior, now starving and broken in the snow. She had no reason to trust a stranger, but opened her door anyway. What happened next would change both of their lives in ways neither of them expected. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The winter wind howled across the Norwegian coastline with a ferocity that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, blanketing the rugged landscape in a deceptive layer of white purity that concealed the harshness of survival beneath. The year was 872, and the land was torn between warring jarls who sought to expand their territories and cement their power across the fractured kingdoms of the north. In this world of blood and iron, where strength determined fate and weakness meant death, a lone figure stumbled through the blinding snowstorm, his breath coming in ragged gasps that formed ghostly clouds in the frigid air. Bjorn Eriksson had once been a formidable warrior, a man whose reputation on the battlefield had earned him respect among his fellow raiders and fear among his enemies. Standing at well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of years wielding sword and axe, he possessed the physical prowess that defined the ideal Viking warrior. His hair, normally a rich golden blonde that caught the sunlight like threads of precious metal, now hung in matted frozen strands around his face. His beard, which he had always kept trimmed and clean in the traditional manner of his people, was crusted with ice and blood from a wound on his lip. His piercing blue eyes, which had once surveyed battlefields with tactical precision and scanned horizons for new lands to explore, now struggled to focus through the pain and exhaustion that consumed him. 3 weeks had passed since the battle that had destroyed everything he knew. Bjorn's Jarl, Thorvald the Bold, had led their warband in an ambitious raid against a rival settlement to the south. The intelligence had been faulty, the planning flawed, and the execution disastrous. They had walked into an ambush carefully orchestrated by Jarl Arvid, a cunning leader whose tactical mind had anticipated their every move. The battle had been brutal and swift. Bjorn had fought with the strength of 10 men, his sword singing through the air as he cut down enemy after enemy. But even his considerable skill could not turn the tide of such overwhelming odds. He had watched his brothers in arms fall around him, their blood staining the snow, their final cries echoing in his memory like a haunting refrain that would never fade. When the battle had turned completely against them, Thorvald had made the fatal decision to stand his ground rather than retreat, a choice born of pride rather than wisdom. Bjorn had been knocked unconscious by a blow to his head during the final moments of the fight, and when he had awakened hours later, he found himself partially buried beneath the bodies of fallen warriors, both friend and foe. The enemy had moved on, believing all of Thorvald's men to be dead, and Bjorn had been left alone in a field of corpses as the snow began to fall, covering the evidence of the slaughter with nature's cold indifference. He had crawled out from beneath the dead, every movement sending waves of agony through his battered body, and had begun the long, agonizing journey northward, toward lands he hoped might offer sanctuary. But sanctuary had proven elusive. Without supplies, without proper clothing for the worsening weather, and with injuries that refused to heal properly in the harsh conditions, Bjorn had slowly weakened. He had managed to trap a rabbit during the first week, devouring it raw when he could not maintain a fire in the constant wind and precipitation. The second week had yielded nothing but roots and bark stripped from trees, barely enough to keep his body functioning. By the third week, starvation had set in with a vengeance. His powerful frame, which had once been pure muscle forged through years of training and combat, had begun to consume itself for fuel. His steps had become unsteady, his vision blurred at the edges, and a constant trembling had taken hold of his limbs that no amount of willpower could control. Now, as he crested yet another snow-covered hill, his legs finally gave out beneath him. Bjorn collapsed face first into the deep snow, the cold embrace almost welcoming after the agony of forcing his body to continue moving. He lay there for a long moment, struggling to find the strength to push himself up, to continue the journey that seemed to have no end. His mind drifted to memories of better times, of feast halls filled with warm mead and roasted meat, of the camaraderie of warriors sharing tales of their conquests, of the satisfaction of returning home from a successful raid with silver and goods to share among his people. Those memories felt like they belonged to another lifetime, to another man who no longer existed. Through the howling wind, Bjorn's fading consciousness detected something unexpected, the scent of smoke, not the acrid smell of destruction and burning villages, but the comforting aroma of a hearth fire, of wood burning steadily to provide warmth and light. His survival instinct, honed through years of warfare and hardship, forced his eyes open. In the distance, barely visible through the curtain of falling snow, he could make out the dim glow of firelight emanating from a small dwelling. It was a modest structure, clearly not the hall of a wealthy jarl, but rather the humble home of a farming family trying to survive the brutal winter in these isolated lands. Summoning every last reserve of strength his body possessed, Bjorn pushed himself to his hands and knees. The world spun violently around him, and he had to pause, breathing deeply, fighting against the darkness that threatened to pull him under. Slowly, painfully, he began to crawl through the snow toward that distant light. Each movement forward was an act of pure willpower over a body that had already given up. His fingers, numb and unresponsive, dug into the snow for purchase. His knees, scraped raw through his torn trousers, left small traces of blood in his wake. Time lost all meaning as he focused entirely on the simple act of moving forward, of covering the distance between himself and potential salvation one agonizing length at a time. He had no idea how long the crawling took. Minutes or hours, it was impossible to tell. But eventually, miraculously, Bjorn found himself at the base of a wooden door. Using the last of his strength, he raised one fist and pounded against the weathered wood, the sound barely audible over the screaming wind. Once, twice, 3 times he struck the door before his arm fell limply to his side. He slumped against the threshold, his consciousness fading rapidly, darkness closing in from all sides like a predator circling wounded prey. Inside the dwelling, Astrid, Bjorn's daughter, had been mending a tear in one of her father's tunics when the faint sound of someone pounding on the door reached her ears. She froze, her needle suspended in mid-stitch, her heart suddenly racing with a mixture of fear and concern. Visitors were rare this far from the main settlements, especially during the worst of winter, and unexpected arrivals often meant trouble. Her father, Bjorn the Elder, a farmer who shared his name coincidentally with the man now dying on his doorstep, was away on a hunting expedition with several other men from the scattered homesteads in the area. They had been gone for 3 days, seeking to bring down one of the elk herds that migrated through the forests this time of year, leaving Astrid alone to maintain the household. At 19 years of age, Astrid possessed a striking beauty that seemed almost out of place in the harsh environment of the Norwegian wilderness. Her hair fell in thick waves of deep auburn, a color like polished copper that caught the firelight and seemed to glow with an inner warmth. She kept it in a practical braid that hung down to the middle of her back, though several loose strands had escaped to frame her face. Her eyes were an unusual shade of green, bright and intelligent, always observing the world around her with a keen awareness that missed little. Her features were delicate yet strong, with high cheekbones, a straight nose, and full lips that curved easily into smiles despite the hardships of frontier life. Her figure, though modestly concealed beneath layers of practical wool clothing necessary for survival in the cold, showed the curves of womanhood combined with the strength that came from years of hard work alongside her father. Astrid set aside her mending and rose from her seat near the fire, her mind racing through possibilities. The pounding had been weak, not the forceful knock of raiders or enemies seeking entry. It had sounded desperate, almost pleading. Moving cautiously to the door, she pressed her ear against the wood, listening intently for any sounds that might indicate danger. She heard nothing but the wind, but something in her heart told her that someone outside needed help urgently. Making a decision that would change the course of her life forever, Astrid lifted the heavy wooden bar that secured the door and pulled it open. The wind immediately rushed in, bringing with it a blast of snow and freezing air that made her stagger backward. There, collapsed across her threshold, lay the largest man she had ever seen. Even in his current state of near death, his size was impressive, his broad shoulders barely fitting through the doorframe. His face, partially obscured by frozen hair and beard, showed strong features marked by suffering and exhaustion. Blood had dried in several places on his exposed skin, and his clothing hung in tatters that offered virtually no protection against the elements. For a moment, Astrid simply stared in shock, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Then, her natural compassion and healing instincts took over. She had helped her father tend to injured animals and had learned basic healing skills from her mother before she had passed away 5 winters ago. This man was clearly dying, and if she did nothing, he would freeze to death on her doorstep within minutes. Without allowing herself time to reconsider or question the wisdom of her actions, Astrid bent down and grasped the unconscious man under his arms. He was incredibly heavy, his muscular frame like trying to move a felled tree, but desperation gave her strength she did not know she possessed. Inch by inch, she dragged him across the threshold and into the warmth of her home. Her muscles screamed in protest, her back straining under the effort, but she did not stop until she had pulled him completely inside and could push the door closed against the storm. Breathing heavily from the exertion, Astrid paused to catch her breath before assessing her unexpected guest more carefully. Now that he was in the firelight, she could see the full extent of his condition. He was severely malnourished, his skin pulled tight over his frame in a way that suggested prolonged starvation. Numerous cuts and bruises covered his exposed skin, some fresh, others in various stages of healing. His hands were in particularly bad condition, with several fingers showing signs of frostbite, the skin discolored and damaged from prolonged exposure to extreme cold. Astrid knew she had to work quickly. She moved to the fire and added more wood, building up the flames to generate as much heat as possible. Then she retrieved several furs from her sleeping area and began the careful process of removing the stranger's frozen, inadequate clothing. His tunic was barely more than rags, and his trousers were torn in so many places that they offered almost no coverage. Beneath the clothing, his body told the story of a warrior's life. Numerous scars crisscrossed his torso and arms, each one marking a battle survived, an enemy defeated, a moment when death had come close but had been cheated. His muscles, though wasted by starvation, still showed the fundamental structure of immense physical strength that had been built over many years of rigorous training and combat. As she worked, removing the wet, frozen garments and replacing them with warm, dry furs, Astrid found herself studying his face more closely. Even in unconsciousness, even marked by suffering and deprivation, he was undeniably handsome. His features were strong and masculine, with a square jaw, a straight nose that had been broken and healed at least once, and a high forehead. His closed eyes were set beneath well-defined brows, and she found herself wondering what color they might be when they opened. There was something about him that spoke of nobility, of natural leadership, despite his current broken state. This was not a common farmer or simple trader. This was a warrior, a man who had lived by the sword and probably expected to die by it as well. Once she had him wrapped in furs and positioned as close to the fire as she dared without risking burns, Astrid turned her attention to the more immediate concern of nourishment. She had a pot of stew simmering over the fire, a mixture of root vegetables, barley, and a small amount of salted pork that she had been rationing to last until her father's return. Moving quickly, she ladled some of the broth into a wooden bowl, allowing it to cool to a temperature that would not burn his mouth. Then she knelt beside the unconscious man, gently lifting his head and cradling it in her lap. "You must drink," she whispered, though she knew he could not hear her. "You must fight to stay alive." Carefully, she brought the bowl to his lips and tipped a small amount of the warm broth into his mouth. At first, there was no response, and she feared she might be too late, that he had already slipped too far toward death to be pulled back. But then his throat moved reflexively, swallowing the liquid, and a small sound escaped him, something between a moan and a sigh. Encouraged, Astrid continued, feeding him small amounts of broth, patient and gentle, giving his body time to accept the nourishment it so desperately needed. As she worked, her mind wandered to questions about this mysterious stranger. Who was he? Where had he come from? What terrible circumstances had reduced such a powerful warrior to this pitiful state? And perhaps most importantly, what would happen when he regained consciousness? Would he be grateful for her help, or would he prove to be a danger to her? She was alone here, vulnerable, and she had just invited a complete stranger into her home, a man who was clearly a seasoned fighter based on the evidence written across his body and scars. But even as these concerns flickered through her mind, Astrid found she could not regret her decision. It was not in her nature to turn away from someone in need, regardless of the potential risks to herself. Her mother had taught her that compassion was not a weakness but a strength, that the ability to show kindness in a harsh world, was what separated civilized people from animals. And so she continued her gentle ministrations, feeding him broth, monitoring his breathing, adjusting the furs to ensure he stayed warm, and praying to the gods that she had not acted too late to save him. Hours passed in this manner, with Astrid maintaining her vigil beside the unconscious warrior. The storm outside seemed to intensify, the wind howling like a pack of wolves, the snow falling so thick that visibility beyond the door would have been measured in mere feet. But inside, the fire burned steadily, filling the small dwelling with warmth and light, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, color began to return to the stranger's face. His breathing, which had been shallow and irregular when she first pulled him inside, gradually became deeper and more steady. The trembling that had seized his body began to subside as warmth penetrated the core of him that had been frozen for so long. The first sensation Bjorn experienced as consciousness slowly returned was warmth. It spread through his body like honey, thick and sweet, chasing away the numbness that had taken hold of his limbs during those endless days of wandering through the frozen wilderness. The second sensation was softness beneath him, so different from the hard, frozen ground that had been his bed for weeks. His eyelids felt impossibly heavy, as though weighted down with stones, but he forced them open, blinking against the flickering orange light that danced across his vision. The ceiling above him was made of rough wooden beams, blackened by years of smoke from the central hearth. It was a simple dwelling, modest but well-maintained, speaking of people who took pride in their home despite limited means. Bjorn tried to move, to push himself upright, but his body refused to obey his commands. Every muscle felt like water, weak and unresponsive, and even the simple act of turning his head required an immense effort that left him breathing heavily. "You should not try to move yet," a gentle voice said from somewhere to his left, soft and melodious, with an accent that marked the speaker as local to these northern territories. "You have been unconscious for nearly 2 days. Your body needs time to recover its strength." Bjorn managed to turn his head in the direction of the voice, and his breath caught in his throat at what he saw. A young woman sat beside the fire, her profile illuminated by the dancing flames. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost ethereal, her auburn hair catching the light and reflecting it back in shades of copper and gold. She was focused on some task in her lap, her slender fingers working with practiced efficiency at what appeared to be the preparation of herbs and medicinal plants. There was a gracefulness to her movements, a natural elegance that spoke of both confidence and competence. "Where am I?" Bjorn managed to rasp out, his voice rough and broken from disuse and the damage caused by days of exposure to the freezing wind. Speaking those 3 simple words sent a spike of pain through his throat, and he grimaced, the expression pulling at cuts on his face that were still healing. The woman set aside her work and rose smoothly to her feet, moving to a wooden bucket near the door. She ladled water into a cup and approached him, kneeling beside where he lay. Up close, he could see her eyes clearly for the first time, those striking green orbs that seemed to see directly into his soul. There was kindness in those eyes, but also strength and intelligence. This was no simple farm girl, despite the modesty of her surroundings. "You are in my home, about half a day's journey north of the settlement at Viking," she replied, carefully lifting his head and bringing the cup to his lips. "I am Astrid Bjornsdottir. I found you collapsed at my door 3 nights ago during the worst of the storm. You were nearly frozen to death and clearly had not eaten properly in a very long time." Bjorn drank gratefully, the cool water soothing his ravaged throat. When he had consumed the entire cup, she gently lowered his head back to the furs and regarded him with those penetrating green eyes. "And who are you, warrior? What circumstances brought you to my doorstep in such a terrible state?" The question hung in the air between them, and Bjorn found himself hesitating. In his world, information was power, and revealing too much about oneself to a stranger could prove dangerous. But this woman had saved his life, had taken him into her home despite the obvious risks, had cared for him when she could have simply left him to die in the snow. He owed her at least the courtesy of honesty. "My name is Bjorn Eriksson," he said slowly, watching her face for any sign of recognition. The name meant nothing to her, he could see, which was both a relief and somehow disappointing. "I was a warrior in the service of Jarl Thorvald the Bold. We were ambushed during a raid 3 weeks ago. Everyone else was killed. I alone survived, though I am not certain that survival was a blessing given what followed." Astrid's expression softened with sympathy, and she reached out to adjust the furs covering him, tucking them more securely around his still shivering form. "You have traveled far, then. Thorvald's territories are well to the south of here, nearly a week's journey in good weather. That you made it this distance in your condition speaks to remarkable strength and will. Or remarkable stubbornness," Bjorn replied, and was surprised to find a ghost of a smile crossing his face, the expression feeling foreign after so many days of suffering. "My mother used to say I was too stubborn to know when to quit, even when quitting would be the wiser choice." "Then you are fortunate your stubbornness brought you here," Astrid said, returning his smile with one of her own that lit up her entire face and made something warm bloom in Bjorn's chest, a sensation that had nothing to do with the fire or the furs. "Another hour in that storm and you would not have survived. As it was, I feared I had pulled you inside only to watch you die anyway. Your condition was very grave." Bjorn looked at her more carefully, taking in the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the tension in her shoulders that suggested she had been carrying a heavy burden. "You have been caring for me all this time? Alone?" "My father is away on a hunting expedition with some of the other men from the scattered farms in this area," Astrid explained, moving back to her seat by the fire and resuming her work with the herbs. "They left 5 days ago and should return within another 2 or 3 days, weather permitting. So yes, I have been alone here, though I am quite capable of managing the household by myself. I have done so many times before." There was a note of pride in her voice that Bjorn found himself admiring. This was not a woman who needed constant protection or supervision, despite living in a world where women were often treated as property to be guarded and controlled by fathers, brothers, or husbands. She had an independence about her, a self-sufficiency that spoke of inner strength. "You took a great risk, bringing a strange warrior into your home while you are alone," Bjorn observed, his tactical mind automatically assessing the situation despite his weakened state. "I could have been anyone. A raider, a murderer, someone who would have done you harm the moment I regained my strength." Astrid paused in her work, her hand stilling as she considered his words. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful, measuring. "Yes, I suppose I did take a risk, but I looked at you lying there in the snow, clearly dying, and I could not simply close the door and leave you to your fate. My mother taught me that we are judged not by how we treat those who can benefit us, but by how we treat those who are completely at our mercy. You were at my mercy, Bjorn Eriksson, and I chose compassion over caution. Perhaps that makes me foolish in your eyes, but I would rather be a compassionate fool than a cautious coward." Her words struck something deep within Bjorn, touching a part of him that he had thought hardened beyond reach by years of warfare and violence. In his world, compassion was often seen as weakness, something to be exploited rather than valued. Yet here was this remarkable woman, alone and vulnerable, who had chosen to help him despite the very real dangers involved. She had seen a human being in need and had responded with kindness, asking nothing in return. "It does not make you foolish," Bjorn said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he did not quite understand. "It makes you extraordinary." "In my experience, such compassion is rare indeed, especially in these harsh times when everyone must struggle simply to survive." A faint blush colored Astrid's cheeks at his words, and she ducked her head, focusing intently on grinding the herbs in her mortar. "You give me too much credit. I did only what any decent person would do when faced with someone in desperate need." "No," Bjorn insisted, putting as much strength into his voice as his weakened state allowed. "Most people would have seen a strange warrior at their door and would have feared for their own safety above all else. You chose differently, and that choice saved my life. I am in your debt, Astrid Bjornsdottir, a debt I do not take lightly." Astrid looked up at him then, meeting his intense blue gaze with her own green eyes, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. It was Astrid who finally broke the connection, rising to check the pot that hung over the fire. "You must be hungry," she said, her voice slightly breathless in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "I have been feeding you broth while you were unconscious, but now that you are awake, you should try to eat something more substantial. Your body needs proper nourishment to rebuild its strength." "I do not wish to take food from your mouth," Bjorn protested, though his stomach growled loudly at the mere mention of eating, betraying his desperate hunger. "Winter stores are precious, and you have already given so much to keep me alive. You let me worry about the winter stores," Astrid replied firmly, ladling stew into a wooden bowl. My father and his hunting party will return soon with fresh meat, and spring is not so far away now. You will eat, and you will regain your strength, and we will hear no more arguments on the matter." There was such authority in her voice, such certainty, that Bjorn found himself obeying without further protest. She brought the bowl to him and helped him sit up slightly, propping him against a rolled fur so he could feed himself. His hands shook with weakness as he lifted the spoon, and more than once the food nearly spilled before reaching his mouth. But he persevered, determined to show he was not completely helpless. The stew was simple but delicious, seasoned with herbs and containing chunks of root vegetables and small pieces of salted pork. To Bjorn, who had subsisted on nothing but the barest scraps for weeks, it tasted like the finest feast served in a jarl's hall. He ate slowly, forcing himself to take small bites despite the overwhelming urge to devour everything in the bowl as quickly as possible. His shrunken stomach could not handle large quantities of food all at once, and he knew that eating too much too quickly would only make him ill. As he ate, Astrid returned to her work by the fire, but Bjorn could feel her watching him from the corner of her eye, monitoring his condition with the careful attention of a skilled healer. When he had finished about half the stew and found he could eat no more without discomfort, she immediately noticed and came to take the bowl from his trembling hands. "That is enough for now," she said gently. "In a few hours you can eat more. Your body needs time to adjust to regular food again after such prolonged deprivation." Bjorn nodded, already feeling exhaustion pulling at him despite having been unconscious for days. The simple act of eating had drained what little strength he had managed to gather. Astrid helped him lie back down, adjusting the furs around him with practiced care, and he found himself studying her face as she worked, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her brow furrowed slightly in concentration, the fullness of her lips. "Why do you live so far from the main settlements?" Bjorn asked, curious about this woman who had saved his life. "It is dangerous for a household to be this isolated, especially one with only a man and his daughter. There is safety in numbers, in being close to others who can provide aid if trouble comes." Astrid settled back onto her seat by the fire, pulling a piece of weaving into her lap to keep her hands occupied. "My father prefers the solitude," she explained, her fingers moving deftly through the threads. "He is not a man who enjoys the politics and petty squabbles that seem to dominate life in the larger settlements. Here we have good land for our small herd of sheep and goats, a stream that provides fresh water year-round, and forests where game can be hunted. We trade our wool and the things I weave for what we cannot produce ourselves. It is a simple life, but it is honest and peaceful, which my father values above all else after the violence he experienced in his youth." "Your father was a warrior?" Bjorn asked, intrigued by this glimpse into her background. "Once, yes," Astrid confirmed, a shadow passing over her face. "He served under Jarl Magnus of Tranvik for many years, fought in numerous battles and raids. But he grew weary of the constant bloodshed, of watching friends die for the ambitions of men who sat safely in their halls while others did the fighting. When my mother's father died and left her this land, my father took it as a sign from the gods that it was time to lay down his sword and take up the plow. He has not regretted that decision, though I know the other men sometimes mock him for choosing farming over glory. There is no shame in choosing peace over war," Bjorn said thoughtfully, and he meant it. 3 weeks ago, he might have judged such a choice as cowardice, but his recent experiences had given him a new perspective on the warrior's life. "I have spent my entire adult life fighting, bleeding, and watching good men die. I cannot say that it has brought me happiness, only scars and memories that haunt my sleep." Astrid looked at him with understanding in her eyes, as though she could see the weight of all those battles pressing down on his shoulders. "And what will you do now, Bjorn Eriksson? When you have recovered your strength, where will you go? Will you seek out another Jarl to serve, another war to fight?" It was a question Bjorn had been avoiding thinking about, but now, lying here in the warmth and safety of Astrid's home, he found he could not evade it any longer. What would he do? His entire identity had been built around being a warrior, around serving his Jarl with loyalty and skill. But Thorvald was dead, his warband scattered or slaughtered, and Bjorn found he had no desire to simply attach himself to another lord and continue the same cycle of violence. "I do not know," he admitted honestly, the uncertainty clear in his voice. "For the first time in my life, I truly do not know what path lies ahead of me. All I know is that I survived when I should have died, and perhaps there is a reason for that. Perhaps the gods have some purpose for me beyond simply swinging a sword. Perhaps they do, Astrid said softly, and when their eyes met, Bjorn felt that strange warmth bloom in his chest again, stronger this time. Rest now, warrior. Tomorrow will bring its own answers. For tonight you are safe, you are warm, and you are fed. That is enough. Bjorn wanted to protest, wanted to continue talking with this fascinating woman who had shown him such unexpected kindness, but his body had other ideas. His eyelids grew heavy, and despite his best efforts to fight it, sleep claimed him once more. His last conscious thought was of green eyes that seemed to see all the way into his soul, and a smile that made him feel, for the first time in longer than he could remember, that perhaps life might hold something more than just survival. As Bjorn slept, Astrid continued her work by the firelight, but her mind was not on the weaving in her lap. She found herself thinking about the warrior who had stumbled into her life so unexpectedly, about the strength she could see in him even in his weakened state, about the vulnerability he had shown when speaking of his uncertain future. There was something about Bjorn Eriksson that called to her, something beyond his undeniable physical appeal. She sensed a goodness in him, a capacity for more than just violence, despite the scars that marked him as a seasoned fighter. The days that followed established a rhythm that felt both comfortable and strangely intimate to both Bjorn and Astrid. Each morning she would wake before dawn to tend to the fire, ensuring the dwelling remained warm against the brutal winter cold that still gripped the land. She would prepare a simple breakfast of porridge mixed with dried berries and honey, and would help Bjorn sit up to eat, supporting his back with her own body when his muscles proved too weak to hold him upright for long. These moments of physical closeness, necessary though they were, created an awareness between them that neither could ignore, a crackling tension that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hearth. Bjorn's recovery progressed steadily under Astrid's careful attention. By the 4th day after he had regained consciousness, he could sit up on his own without assistance, though the effort left him breathing heavily and his arms trembling. By the 6th day, he managed to stand for the first time, gripping the wooden support beam near the fire for balance while Astrid hovered nearby, ready to catch him if he fell. His legs shook like those of a newborn calf, muscles that had once been capable of carrying him through hours of battle now struggling to support his weight for even a few moments. "Do not push yourself too hard," Astrid cautioned, watching him with concern as sweat beaded on his forehead from the exertion of simply standing. "Strength returns gradually. If you try to force it, you will only injure yourself and slow your recovery." "I am not accustomed to being weak," Bjorn replied through gritted teeth, frustration evident in every line of his body. "I have spent my entire life building strength, training my body to be a weapon. To be reduced to this, unable to even walk across a room without assistance, it is humiliating." Astrid moved closer to him, close enough that he could smell the herbs she used in her hair, a pleasant scent of rosemary and lavender that seemed to cut through the smoky atmosphere of the dwelling. "There's no shame in healing," she said firmly, placing one hand on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles as he fought to remain upright. "You survived something that would have killed most men. Your body needs time to repair the damage that was done. Accepting that is not weakness, it is wisdom." Bjorn looked down at her, at the way the firelight played across her features, highlighting the determined set of her jaw and the genuine concern in her eyes. She stood barely to his shoulder even in his weakened state, yet there was a strength in her that had nothing to do with physical size. "How did you become so wise?" he asked, his voice softer now, the frustration fading as he allowed himself to really see her. "You speak like someone who has lived many lifetimes, yet you are still so young." A sad smile crossed Astrid's face, and she helped guide him back to his bed of furs, supporting his weight as his legs finally gave out. "My mother used to say that hardship ages the soul even when the body remains young. I lost her when I was 14 winters old, taken by a fever that came on suddenly and could not be broken. In the years since, I have learned to manage this household, to care for my father, to make the decisions that keep us fed and warm through the harsh seasons. Perhaps those responsibilities have given me a perspective beyond my years." Once Bjorn was settled, breathing hard from the exertion, but with a look of accomplishment on his face at having stood even briefly, Astrid returned to the pot hanging over the fire. She had been making a healing tea from willow bark and other herbs. something to help with the pain that still plagued his damaged body. As she worked, Bjorn found himself unable to look away from her, studying the graceful efficiency of her movements, the way she seemed to know instinctively what needed to be done and in what order. "Tell me about your mother," Bjorn said, genuinely curious about the woman who had raised such a remarkable daughter. "What was she like?" Astrid paused in her work, her expression growing distant as memory pulled her into the past. "She was beautiful, with hair the color of wheat in summer and eyes like the sky on a clear day. But more than her appearance, she was kind and patient, always seeing the best in people even when they did not deserve it. She taught me about healing herbs, about weaving and household management, about finding joy in simple things like the first flowers of spring or the sound of rain on the roof. She believed that a woman could be both strong and gentle, that one did not diminish the other." "She sounds like she was an exceptional person," Bjorn observed. "I can see her influence in you, in the way you move through the world with both confidence and compassion." The compliment brought color to Astrid's cheeks, and she focused intently on pouring the tea, avoiding his gaze. "And what of your mother?" she asked, deflecting attention from herself. "You mentioned her earlier. Is she still living?" A complicated expression crossed Bjorn's face, a mixture of affection and old pain. "She lives, yes, or at least she did when I last saw her over a year ago. She resides in a small settlement 3 days' journey south of where Thorvald's Hall once stood. My father died in a raid when I was 12 and she never remarried, choosing instead to maintain her independence. She is a strong woman, stubborn and fierce, with opinions on everything and no hesitation about sharing them. We often clashed when I was younger, her wanting me to stay close to home and learn a trade, me determined to follow in my father's footsteps and become a warrior." "Do you regret that choice now?" Astrid asked gently, bringing him the cup of steaming tea and settling beside him. "Becoming a warrior instead of staying with her, learning a peaceful trade." Bjorn accepted the tea gratefully, wrapping his hands around the warm cup and letting the heat seep into his still cold fingers. He considered the question seriously before answering. "I regret the pain my choice caused her, the worry she must have endured every time I left on a raid, wondering if I would return. But I do not regret the experiences themselves, the brotherhood I found among my fellow warriors, the places I saw, the challenges I overcame. Those things made me who I am, for better or worse. Though I confess, lying here now, I wonder if she was wiser than I gave her credit for. She tried to tell me that a life built on violence would ultimately leave me empty, but I was too young and too convinced of my own invincibility to listen." "You are not so old now," Astrid pointed out with a small smile. "You speak as though your life is behind you, but you have many years ahead if you choose to embrace them differently." "Perhaps," Bjorn agreed, sipping the bitter tea and feeling its warmth spread through his chest. "Though I confess I am not certain what a different life would look like. Fighting is all I have ever truly known." Before Astrid could respond, the sound of voices outside interrupted their conversation. She quickly rose to her feet, moving to the small window that looked out over the snow-covered landscape. Relief flooded her features as she recognized the approaching figures. "My father has returned," she announced, and Bjorn could hear both happiness and a note of anxiety in her voice. She was clearly glad to have her father safely home, but she was also aware that his return would complicate the situation with Bjorn's presence in their household. Bjorn tried to sit up straighter, to present himself as less of an invalid, though he knew it was probably futile. He was still clearly a man in recovery, weak and dependent on Astrid's care. The door opened, bringing with it a blast of cold air and 3 men laden with the carcasses of 2 large elk. The man in front was clearly Astrid's father, the resemblance evident in the shape of his face and the green of his eyes, though his were faded with age and hardship. He was perhaps 50 winters old, with gray liberally streaking his brown hair and beard, his body still strong despite the years, moving with the controlled power of a man who had once been a formidable warrior. Bjorn the Elder stopped short when he saw the stranger resting by his fire, his hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt. The 2 men with him, neighbors who had joined the hunting expedition, also tensed, their eyes assessing Bjorn with the wariness of men who knew that unexpected visitors often meant trouble. "Father," Astrid said quickly, moving to intercept him before the situation could escalate. "This is Bjorn Eriksson. I found him collapsed at our door 6 days ago, nearly dead from starvation and exposure. I brought him inside and have been caring for him." He means us no harm." The elder Bjorn's eyes moved from the stranger to his daughter and back again, taking in the domestic scene before him with the sharp perception of an experienced warrior who missed nothing. He saw the intimacy of their positioning, the way they had clearly been engaged in deep conversation before being interrupted, the protective way Astrid stood between him and the stranger despite the younger Bjorn's obvious weakness. "Eriksson," the older man repeated slowly, his tactical mind working through implications. "That name is not common in these parts. Where do you hail from, warrior, and what brought you to my door in such a condition?" Bjorn met the older man's gaze directly, showing respect but not submission. "I come from the south, from the territories that were controlled by Jarl Thorvald the Bold. My warband was destroyed in an ambush 3 weeks ago. I am the only survivor. I have been wandering since then, trying to reach lands where I might find safety. I collapsed at your threshold and would have died there if not for your daughter's compassion and skill. I owe her my life, and I give you my word as a warrior that I mean no harm to her or to your household." The older Bjorn studied him for a long moment, his experienced eyes seeing past the weakness to the capable fighter that lay beneath. He saw the scars that marked Bjorn's body, the calluses on his hands that spoke of years wielding weapons, the way he held himself even in his weakened state with the posture of a trained warrior. But he also saw something else, something in the way the younger man looked at Astrid, a softness that belied his fierce appearance. Finally, the elder Bjorn nodded slowly and removed his hand from his knife. "Any enemy of Jarl Arvid's is welcome in my home," he said, and there was a weight to his words that suggested a history Bjorn did not yet understand. "I know of the ambush you speak of. Word travels even to these remote places. It was a massacre, they say, with no mercy shown to Thorvald's men. That you survived speaks of considerable skill and fortune. More fortune than skill," Bjorn replied honestly. "I was knocked unconscious during the fighting and buried beneath the bodies of the fallen. The enemy thought me dead and moved on. When I awoke, I was alone in a field of corpses with winter closing in. One of the other hunters, a burly man with a thick red beard, spoke up. 'We should be cautious, Bjorn. This man is a stranger, and these are dangerous times. How do we know he is truly who he claims to be? How do we know he is not a scout for raiders, sent to assess our defenses?' 'Look at him, Torsten,' Astrid's father replied, gesturing at the clearly weakened Bjorn. 'Does he look like a scout in any condition to report back to anyone? He can barely stand on his own. My daughter has been caring for him for nearly a week, and I trust her judgment. She has kept our household running in my absence, has made difficult decisions with wisdom beyond her years. If she believed him trustworthy enough to bring into our home, then I will honor that belief.' The validation from her father brought a look of gratitude to Astrid's face, and she moved to help the men with their kill, beginning the process of butchering and preserving the meat that would help sustain them through the remainder of winter. As she worked, Bjorn watched her, marveling at her competence, the way she wielded the knife with practiced skill, wasting nothing, using every part of the animals with efficiency born of necessity and respect for the lives taken to sustain them. Over the following hours, as the men worked to process the elk and store the meat, Bjorn learned more about the small community of isolated farms that existed in this remote region. There were perhaps a dozen households scattered across the surrounding valleys and hills, each separated by an hour's walk or more, each largely self-sufficient but bound together by ties of mutual aid and protection. They gathered together for major festivals, helped each other with large tasks like building or harvesting, and maintained a watch system to warn of approaching dangers. That evening, as they sat around the fire sharing a meal of fresh elk meat roasted over the flames, Bjorn the elder questioned the younger Bjorn more thoroughly about his background, his skills, and his intentions. It was clear the older man was trying to assess whether this stranger represented a threat or a potential asset to their small community. Bjorn answered honestly, holding nothing back, sensing that anything less than complete truthfulness would be detected and would destroy any possibility of trust. "So, what will you do now?" the elder Bjorn finally asked, echoing the question his daughter had posed days earlier. "You have no Jarl to serve, no warband to fight alongside. Winter still has many weeks left before spring arrives. You cannot survive on your own in the wilderness in your current condition, and even once you have recovered your strength, traveling alone in these lands is dangerous." "I do not know," Bjorn admitted, the same answer he had given Astrid, but now spoken with a different weight. I know only that I survived when I should not have, and I find myself questioning things I once accepted without thought. What is the purpose of strength if it is used only for destruction? What is the value of skill in battle if every fight leaves you more scarred and hollow inside? Your daughter has shown me kindness I did not know still existed in this world, and it has made me wonder if perhaps there might be a different path forward than the one I have always followed. Astrid, who had been quietly eating her meal, looked up at his words, something warm and hopeful kindling in her green eyes. Her father noticed the look and the way she quickly glanced away, and Bjorn saw the older man's expression shift, a new understanding dawning on his weathered features. You are welcome to stay here until you have fully recovered your strength, Bjorn the elder said slowly, making a decision that would change all of their lives in ways none of them could yet foresee. In return, once you are able, you will help with the work of the household and the farm. There is much to be done as we prepare for spring planting, and an extra pair of strong hands would be valuable. This will give you time to decide what path you wish to follow, and it will allow you to repay the debt you feel you owe my daughter for saving your life. The weeks that followed brought profound changes to the small household tucked away in the Norwegian wilderness. As winter began its slow retreat and the first tentative signs of spring appeared in the lengthening days and the occasional patches of bare earth emerging from beneath the melting snow, Bjorn's strength returned with increasing rapidity. The nourishing food, the warmth and safety of shelter, and Astrid's continued careful attention worked a transformation that seemed almost miraculous to those who had seen him at his lowest point. By the third week of his recovery, Bjorn could walk without assistance, though he still tired easily and had to rest frequently. By the fourth week, he insisted on beginning to contribute to the household work, starting with simple tasks like splitting firewood and carrying water from the stream. Astrid's father watched these efforts with approval, seeing in the younger man's determination a quality he valued highly. The elder Bjorn had lived long enough to know that character was revealed not in moments of triumph, but in how a person conducted themselves during times of hardship and recovery. What the older man also noticed, with the keen perception that came from years of reading people and situations, was the growing connection between his daughter and their guest. He saw it in the way Astrid's eyes would seek out Bjorn whenever he entered the room, in the soft smile that curved her lips when she watched him accomplish some new task that demonstrated his returning strength. He saw it equally in the way Bjorn looked at Astrid, with an expression that mixed respect, gratitude, and something deeper, something that made the older warrior remember his own youth and the way he had felt when he first met the woman who would become Astrid's mother. One crisp morning, when patches of blue sky broke through the perpetual gray of winter clouds and the air carried the faint promise of warmth to come, Bjorn the elder approached the younger man as he worked at splitting logs for the woodpile. Bjorn had removed his tunic despite the cold, his body having grown overheated from the exertion, and his muscled torso gleamed with sweat in the pale sunlight. The scars that covered his skin stood out in sharp relief, each one a story of survival, a testament to battles fought and won. You are recovering well, the older man observed, settling onto a nearby stump and watching the rhythmic rise and fall of the axe as Bjorn split log after log with practiced efficiency. Another week or two and you will be back to full strength, I think. You are a resilient man, Eriksson. Lesser warriors would have died from what you endured. Bjorn paused in his work, driving the axe into the chopping block and wiping sweat from his brow. I owe my recovery to your daughter's skill and dedication, he replied, gratitude evident in his voice, and to your generosity in allowing me to remain here and heal. I will not forget these kindnesses. Yes, my daughter, the elder Bjorn said, and there was a weight to the words that made the younger man look at him more carefully. She has been very attentive to your care, perhaps more so than strictly necessary for a patient who is essentially a stranger to our family. The implication hung in the air between them, and Bjorn felt his heart rate increase in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. He met the older man's gaze directly, refusing to look away or pretend he did not understand what was being suggested. Astrid is a remarkable woman, Bjorn said carefully, choosing his words with the same precision he had once used in planning battle strategies. She is intelligent, skilled, compassionate, and strong in ways that have nothing to do with physical power. Any man would be fortunate to earn her regard. And have you earned her regard, young Eriksson? The elder Bjorn asked bluntly, his eyes sharp as they studied the younger man's face. Or perhaps more accurately, Are you seeking to earn something more than simple regard from my daughter? Bjorn was silent for a long moment, wrestling with feelings and desires he had not fully acknowledged even to himself. Finally, he spoke with the same honesty that had characterized all his dealings with this household. I will not lie to you or insult your intelligence by pretending I have not developed feelings for Astrid. How could I not? She saved my life, cared for me when I was helpless, showed me a kindness I did not deserve and certainly had not earned. But more than gratitude, I find myself drawn to who she is as a person. Her strength of character, her wisdom, the way she moves through the world with both confidence and humility. I think about her constantly, find excuses to be near her, value every word she speaks and every smile she grants me. The older man listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When Bjorn finished, he remained silent for several heartbeats before speaking. My daughter is my most precious treasure, the last piece I have of the woman I loved more than life itself. I have protected her, provided for her, tried to raise her with the values her mother held dear. I have turned away 3 men from nearby settlements who sought her hand in marriage because I could see they valued only her beauty and her skills as a household manager, not the person she truly is. I understand, Bjorn said quietly, and I know I have nothing to offer her. I am a warrior without a warband, a man with no land, no wealth, no prospects beyond the strength of my arms and the skills I have with weapons. I have lived a life of violence and destruction, and I carry the scars of that life both on my body and in my heart. She deserves far better than what I could provide. Perhaps, the elder Bjorn agreed, but there was a thoughtful quality to his voice that gave Bjorn pause. Or perhaps what she deserves is a man who sees her true worth, who values her for more than what she can provide him, a man who has the strength to protect her, but also the wisdom to respect her independence, a man who has seen enough of death and destruction to truly appreciate the peace and joy she brings to a home. Bjorn looked at the older man with growing hope, hardly daring to believe what he thought he heard in those words. Are you saying? I am saying nothing definitive, the elder Bjorn interrupted, but there was a hint of warmth in his usually stern expression. What I will say is this. If your feelings for my daughter are genuine, if you believe you could make her happy and build a life with her, then you have my permission to court her properly. But understand this, young Eriksson. If you hurt her, if you betray the trust she has placed in you, there is no place in all the 9 realms where you could hide from my vengeance. I may be a farmer now, but I have not forgotten how to wield a sword, and I will use every skill I possess to make you regret causing her pain. The threat was delivered calmly, almost conversationally, but Bjorn heard the absolute sincerity beneath the words and knew the older man meant every syllable. I would expect nothing less, he replied with equal seriousness, and I give you my oath that I will never willingly cause Astrid pain. She has become precious to me in a way I cannot fully explain, and the thought of harming her is abhorrent. The elder Bjorn nodded, apparently satisfied with this response. He rose from his seat and placed a hand on the younger man's shoulder, a gesture of acceptance and tentative approval. Then perhaps we should discuss what courting my daughter would actually entail, and what you would need to accomplish before I would consider giving my blessing to any formal union between you. Over the next hour, as they continued working on the woodpile together, the 2 men talked with a frankness that laid the foundation for mutual respect and understanding. The elder Bjorn explained that while he valued Astrid's happiness above all else, he also needed to ensure she would be provided for, that any man who claimed her as his wife would be capable of supporting a family and contributing to their small community. This meant Bjorn would need to establish himself somehow, to prove he could be more than just a warrior seeking the next battle. There is land available, the elder Bjorn explained as they stacked the split logs. About an hour's walk to the east, there is a valley with good soil and access to water. It belonged to a family that died from sickness 2 winters ago, and it has stood empty since. If you were to claim that land, build a home there, establish a farm or some other means of supporting yourself, that would demonstrate the commitment and capability I need to see before I would give my blessing. I know nothing of farming, Bjorn admitted, though the prospect intrigued him rather than intimidated him. I can wield a sword and an axe in battle, but turning soil and growing crops are skills I have never learned. Then you will learn, the older man replied simply. I will teach you what you need to know, as will the other farmers in our community. You have proven you can work hard and follow instructions. The rest is simply a matter of time and dedication, and your skills as a warrior will not be wasted. There is always need for someone capable of defending our settlements from raiders and wild animals. You could serve as a protector for our community while also building your own household. The conversation was interrupted by Astrid's call that the midday meal was ready. As the two men made their way back to the dwelling, Bjorn found his mind racing with possibilities he had never seriously considered before. A life of peace, of building rather than destroying, of waking each morning beside a woman he loved, rather than in a camp surrounded by warriors preparing for the next raid. It was so different from everything he had known, yet somehow it felt right in a way his previous life never truly had. Inside the warm dwelling, Astrid had prepared a hearty stew along with fresh bread she had baked that morning. As they ate, Bjorn found himself watching her with new eyes, imagining a future where she would be his wife, where they would share a home they built together, where perhaps children would eventually fill the space with laughter and life. The thought should have terrified him, should have felt like a trap closing around a man who had valued his freedom and independence above all else. Instead, it filled him with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or the food. Astrid noticed his gaze and met his eyes across the table, a question in her expression. Bjorn smiled at her, a genuine smile that lit up his entire face and made her breath catch in her throat. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding without words, a recognition of feelings that had been building since the night she had pulled him from the snow and chosen to save his life rather than protect only her own safety. After the meal, while her father rested and Bjorn returned to his work outside, Astrid found herself moving through her household tasks with a lightness she had not felt in years. She caught herself humming as she worked, old songs her mother had taught her, melodies of love and hope and new beginnings. She did not know what the future held, but for the first time since her mother's death, she allowed herself to hope for something more than just survival, for a life filled with joy and partnership and love. That evening, as the sun set in a spectacular display of orange and pink that painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of fire, Bjorn asked Astrid if she would walk with him. Her father, observing this request with a knowing look, granted permission with a nod, though he made it clear they should not go far and should return before full darkness fell. They walked in comfortable silence at first, following a path that led along the partially frozen stream that ran near the dwelling. The air was cold, but not unbearably so, and the clear sky promised a night of stars that would rival any jewels in a jarl's treasure hoard. Finally, when they reached a point where a large flat rock provided a natural seat overlooking the valley below, Bjorn stopped and turned to face Astrid. "I spoke with your father today," he began, his heart pounding with a nervousness he had never felt before any battle. "He has given me permission to court you properly if that is something you would welcome. But before I say anything more, I need to know your feelings. I know I owe you my life, and I do not want gratitude or obligation to color your response. If your care for me has been purely that of a healer for her patient, I will accept that and will ask for nothing more than your continued friendship." Astrid looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the last light of the setting sun, and Bjorn thought he had never seen anything more beautiful in his entire life. She reached out and took his hand, her smaller fingers intertwining with his larger ones, and the simple touch sent warmth flooding through his entire body. "My feelings for you go far beyond those of a healer for her patient," Astrid said softly, her voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "From the moment I looked into your eyes that first day you awakened, I felt something I had never experienced before. At first I told myself it was simply compassion, the natural concern one feels for someone vulnerable and in need of care. But as the days passed and I came to know you, to understand the man beneath the warrior's exterior, I realized my feelings had grown into something far deeper and more profound." Bjorn's hand tightened around hers, and he seemed to struggle for words. This man who had faced countless enemies without hesitation now rendered speechless by the simple honesty of a woman's declaration. Astrid continued, needing to express everything she had kept locked inside for weeks. "I have watched you transform from a man on the edge of death to someone full of life and strength again. I have seen your kindness in how you speak to my father with respect, your humility in accepting help when you needed it, your determination to contribute and earn your place here, rather than simply taking what was offered. You make me laugh with your stories. You challenge me with your questions, and you look at me in a way that makes me feel seen and valued for who I truly am, not just for what I can provide or how I can serve." She paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to say next. "When I imagine my future now, Bjorn Eriksson, I cannot picture it without you in it. The thought of you leaving, of going back to a life of warfare and violence, fills me with a dread I can barely contain. So yes, if you wish to court me, if you believe we might build something lasting together, then you have my wholehearted agreement and enthusiasm." The joy that flooded Bjorn's face at her words was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture of reverence and affection that made her heart race. "You have given me a gift beyond measure," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I came to your door a broken man, empty inside in ways that had nothing to do with hunger or cold. You have filled those empty spaces with hope and purpose, and the possibility of a future I never dared to dream of. I promise you, Astrid, I will spend every day proving myself worthy of the trust and affection you are placing in me." They sat together on the rock as twilight deepened into night, talking about their hopes and dreams, sharing stories from their pasts, beginning the process of truly knowing one another that is the foundation of any lasting partnership. Bjorn spoke of his childhood, of a mother who had tried to teach him gentleness alongside strength, of a father whose early death had pushed him toward a warrior's path, perhaps before he was truly ready. Astrid shared memories of her mother, of lessons learned about healing and household management, of the loneliness she had sometimes felt living so far from other young people her age. When the stars had emerged in their full glory, transforming the sky into a canopy of silver light, they finally made their way back to the dwelling, walking close together, their shoulders touching, their hands still intertwined. Bjorn the elder, who had been waiting with poorly concealed anxiety for their return, took one look at their faces and smiled, a genuine expression of happiness that erased years from his weathered features. "I see the walk was productive," he observed dryly, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. "I trust you conducted yourselves with proper propriety and did not give the neighbors any reason for gossip." "There are no neighbors close enough to see anything," Astrid replied with a laugh, her cheeks flushed with happiness and the cold night air. "But yes, father, we behaved entirely appropriately. Bjorn has asked to court me, and I have accepted. I hope this meets with your approval." "It does," the elder Bjorn confirmed, rising to embrace his daughter and then extending his hand to the younger man. "Welcome to the family, Eriksson. Though understand that courtship is not marriage, and there is still much you must accomplish before I will consider you ready to claim my daughter as your wife. We will discuss the specifics tomorrow. For now, let us celebrate this new understanding with the mead I have been saving for a special occasion." The three of them sat by the fire late into the night, sharing the sweet honey wine and talking about practical matters that would need to be addressed. The elder Bjorn outlined his expectations clearly. Before any formal betrothal could be arranged, Bjorn would need to claim the empty land to the east, build at least the basic structure of a home, and demonstrate he could support himself and eventually a family through farming, hunting, or some combination of useful skills. This would take time, likely several months of hard work as spring progressed into summer. "I will help you," the older man promised, "as will the other men in our community once they understand your intentions are honorable. We take care of our own here, and if you are to become part of Astrid's life, then you become part of our extended family. But the bulk of the work must be yours. This is how you will prove your commitment, not just to me but to yourself and to Astrid." Bjorn accepted these terms without hesitation, recognizing the wisdom in them. He needed to prove to himself, as much as to anyone else, that he could build a life based on creation rather than destruction, that his worth was not solely defined by his ability to fight and kill. The challenge excited him in a way that preparing for battle never had, because the stakes were not just his own survival, but the possibility of a future with the woman he had come to love. The following morning brought the first truly warm day of the approaching spring. The sun shone brilliantly in a cloudless sky, and the sound of melting snow dripping from the roof was like music, a promise that winter's grip was finally loosening. After breaking their fast, the elder Bjorn announced they would make the journey to the empty land he had mentioned, to assess what would be required to make it habitable. The three of them set out together, following paths that were slowly emerging from beneath the melting snow. The walk took them through forests of pine and birch, across meadows that would soon be green with new growth, past streams swollen with runoff from the mountains. Astrid walked between the two men, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing knowledge about the plants they passed, which ones were useful for healing or cooking, which ones should be avoided. When they finally crested the rise that looked down into the valley the elder Bjorn had described, all three stopped to take in the view. It was, Bjorn had to admit, a beautiful piece of land. The valley was perhaps half a mile across, sheltered on three sides by gentle hills covered in forest. A clear stream ran through the center, and Bjorn could see where fields had once been cultivated, now overgrown but showing the promise of good soil beneath. The remains of a dwelling stood near the stream, partially collapsed but with some walls still standing, providing at least a foundation to build upon. "It is perfect," Bjorn breathed, and he meant it. In his mind's eye, he could already see what this place could become. A sturdy home rising where the ruins now stood, fields of grain swaying in the summer breeze, perhaps a small herd of sheep or goats grazing on the hillsides. And most importantly, he could envision Astrid here, her laughter filling the air, her presence making this empty valley into a true home. They spent several hours exploring the valley, assessing what remained of the previous dwelling, identifying where new structures would need to be built. The elder Bjorn pointed out the best locations for different purposes, drawing on his years of experience to help Bjorn understand what would be required. It was overwhelming in its scope, but rather than feeling daunted, Bjorn felt energized, eager to begin the work that would transform this abandoned land into a home. "We will start tomorrow," the elder Bjorn decided as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. "I will send word to the other households, call for a gathering to discuss what aid they can provide. In our community, we believe that when one family prospers, we all benefit. They will help you, especially once they understand you intend to marry my daughter and make your life here among us." As they made their way back to the dwelling that evening, Astrid walked close beside Bjorn, occasionally reaching out to touch his arm, as though reassuring herself that he was real, and that the future they had discussed was truly possible. Bjorn found himself doing the same, still somewhat amazed that this remarkable woman had chosen him, that she saw potential for goodness in a man whose hands were stained with the blood of countless enemies. The following weeks were filled with activity unlike anything Bjorn had experienced in his life as a warrior. The elder Bjorn made good on his promise, sending word to the scattered households about Bjorn's intentions and requesting aid in building a new home. The response was overwhelming. Men arrived from farms throughout the region, bringing tools, materials, and expertise. They came not just out of respect for the elder Bjorn, but because they recognized that having another strong, capable man in their community was valuable, especially one with Bjorn's fighting skills who could help defend against raiders or other threats. Work on the new dwelling began in earnest. The first task was clearing away the remains of the old structure, salvaging what materials could be reused and disposing of the rest. Then came the cutting of timber from the surrounding forests, selecting trees of the right size and quality for the construction. Bjorn threw himself into this work with a dedication that impressed even the most skeptical of the neighboring farmers. He was up before dawn each day, working until long after sunset, his powerful frame perfectly suited to the demanding physical labor. Astrid visited the worksite frequently, bringing food and drink for the workers, offering encouragement and occasionally practical suggestions that came from her experience managing a household. Bjorn lived for these visits, for the moments when their eyes would meet across the construction site, and she would smile at him with a mixture of pride and affection that made his heart soar. Sometimes, when the other men were occupied elsewhere, they would steal a few moments alone, standing close together, talking quietly about their plans and dreams. "It is taking shape beautifully," Astrid observed one afternoon, about a month into the construction. The walls of the main dwelling were now fully raised, sturdy and strong, with windows positioned to capture the morning light. "I can already imagine what it will look like when it is finished, how we will arrange things inside, where the fire will burn and where we will sleep," and she stopped abruptly, blushing as she realized what she had said. Bjorn smiled gently, reaching out to cup her face with one calloused hand. "I imagine those things too," he admitted softly. "Every timber I raise, every stone I set in place. I think about you here, about us building a life together in this place. It sustains me through the hardest work, knowing that at the end of it all, you will be here with me." Their courtship continued to deepen throughout this period, though always conducted with the propriety that Astrid's father demanded. They were never alone together for extended periods, and physical affection was limited to held hands and occasional chaste kisses, but the emotional intimacy between them grew stronger with each passing day. They learned each other's habits and preferences, their strengths and weaknesses, building the foundation of understanding and respect that would support their marriage. As spring progressed into early summer, the dwelling neared completion. The roof was thatched, the floor laid, a proper hearth constructed with stones carried up from the stream. Bjorn had also begun clearing and preparing fields for planting, and he had constructed a sturdy pen for the small flock of sheep that the elder Bjorn had given him as a wedding gift in advance to help establish his household. The community gathering to celebrate the completion of Bjorn's dwelling was scheduled for midsummer, when the days were longest and the weather most favorable for festivities. In the weeks leading up to this event, Bjorn worked tirelessly to ensure everything would be perfect, not just for the celebration but as proof to Astrid's father that he had truly established a home worthy of bringing a bride to. He built furniture with his own hands, crafting a sturdy table and benches, a bed frame that he carefully carved with intricate patterns along the posts, shelves for storage, and all the other necessities of a functioning household. Astrid contributed to these preparations as well, weaving wool from Bjorn's small flock into blankets and wall hangings that would provide warmth and beauty to their future home. She gathered herbs from the forests and meadows, drying them in bundles that she hung from the rafters, filling the dwelling with their pleasant scents. She made pottery and acquired cooking implements through trade, slowly assembling everything that would be needed to maintain a proper household. During one of her visits to the nearly completed dwelling, about a week before the scheduled gathering, Astrid walked through the space with obvious pleasure, running her hands along the smooth wood of the table, examining the bed that Bjorn had constructed with such care, imagining how they would arrange their lives within these walls. Bjorn watched her with barely contained emotion, seeing his own dreams reflected in her expression. "It is more than I ever imagined," Astrid said softly, turning to face him with tears glistening in her green eyes. "You have built not just a house, Bjorn, but a home, a place where we can grow old together, where we can raise children, where we can find peace and happiness. I am so proud of what you have accomplished, of the man you have proven yourself to be." Unable to restrain himself any longer, Bjorn crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. She came willingly, her arms wrapping around his waist, her head resting over his heart. They stood like that for a long moment, simply holding each other, feeling the rightness of being together, the sense of completion that came from finding the person with whom they were meant to share their lives. "I love you, Astrid," Bjorn whispered into her hair, speaking words he had never said to another soul in his entire life. "I loved you from the moment you showed me kindness when you had every reason to fear me, from the moment you chose compassion over self-preservation. You have transformed my life in ways I cannot fully express. You have given me purpose and hope and a future worth living for." Astrid pulled back just enough to look up into his face, her eyes shining with joy and love. "And I love you, Bjorn Eriksson. You are everything I never knew I was searching for. Strong yet gentle, fierce yet kind. A warrior who chooses to build rather than destroy. You have my heart completely, now and forever." They kissed then, a deep and passionate kiss that spoke of all the longing they had carefully restrained during the months of courtship, of promises and commitment, and a love that would endure whatever challenges the future might bring. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily, and Bjorn had to exercise considerable willpower to step back, to maintain the propriety that Astrid's father had demanded as a condition of their courtship. "Soon," he promised, his voice rough with emotion and desire. "Soon you will be my wife, and we will not have to restrain ourselves any longer. Soon this will truly be our home, and we will begin the life we have both been dreaming of." "Soon," Astrid agreed, her own voice unsteady. "And it will be worth the wait, worth every moment of restraint and anticipation. Our wedding night will be the beginning of everything we have worked toward." The day of the gathering arrived with perfect weather, warm sunshine, and a gentle breeze that carried the scents of summer flowers and new-mown hay. Families began arriving at Bjorn's new homestead early in the morning, coming from all the scattered farms in the region, bringing food and drink for the celebration, gifts for the new household, and their good wishes for the couple's future happiness. Tables were set up in the clearing before the dwelling, and soon they were laden with roasted meats, fresh bread, vegetables from early harvests, honey cakes, and barrels of mead and ale. The elder Bjorn arrived with Astrid, and Bjorn's heart nearly stopped at the sight of her. She wore a new dress she had made specifically for this occasion, dyed a deep blue that matched the summer sky, and embroidered with intricate patterns along the neckline and sleeves. Her auburn hair was unbound, falling in shining waves down her back, with flowers woven into it that added splashes of white and yellow. She was breathtaking, and from the proud smile on her father's face it was clear the older man knew exactly the effect his daughter would have on her betrothed. The gathering was unlike anything Bjorn had experienced during his years as a warrior. There was no competition here, no posturing or attempts to establish dominance through shows of strength. Instead, there was genuine community, people who supported each other and celebrated each other's successes because they understood that when one household prospered, the entire community benefited. Children ran and played while their parents talked and laughed, sharing stories and news, strengthening the bonds that held their scattered settlement together. As the ranking elder present and Astrid's father, Bjorn the elder called for attention as the sun reached its zenith. The crowd quieted, gathering in a loose circle around where the older man stood with his daughter and Bjorn. His voice carried clearly in the summer air as he addressed the assembly. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the completion of Bjorn Eriksson's homestead and to formally recognize his betrothal to my daughter, Astrid. When this man first came to us, he was a stranger, a warrior from the south with nothing to his name but the scars of his past. Some of you counseled caution, suggested he might bring danger to our peaceful community, but my daughter saw something in him that others missed, saw the potential for goodness and growth that lay beneath the surface." The elder Bjorn paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled families before continuing. "In the months since, Bjorn has proven himself to be exactly the kind of man we value in our community. He has worked tirelessly to build this homestead, never complaining about the difficulty of the tasks before him, never expecting others to do for him what he could accomplish through his own efforts. He has been respectful to all, helpful to those who needed assistance, and has shown himself to be a man of honor and integrity. But most importantly, he has shown my daughter the love and devotion she deserves." He turned to face Bjorn directly, his expression serious but not unkind. "Bjorn Eriksson, you have met every challenge I set before you, exceeded every expectation. You have built a home worthy of my daughter, established the means to support a family, and proven you can be more than just a warrior. Therefore, with the witness of this community, I give my formal blessing to your union with Astrid. May the gods grant you both long life, many children, and the happiness you have both earned through your dedication and love." A cheer went up from the assembled crowd, and Bjorn felt emotion threaten to overwhelm him. He had faced death in battle countless times without flinching, but the simple act of being accepted by this community, of having his worth recognized for something other than his ability to fight, moved him in ways combat never had. He reached for Astrid's hand, and she gave it gladly, her smile radiant with joy. "Thank you," Bjorn said, his voice carrying to all assembled despite the emotion that made it rough. "I came to this community as a broken man, expecting nothing and deserving even less. You have given me acceptance, assistance, and most precious of all, you have given me Astrid. I swear to you all, on my honor as a warrior and as a man, that I will be worthy of these gifts. I will work to support not just my own household, but to contribute to the well-being of this entire community. I will protect those who need protection, help those who need assistance, and honor the trust you have placed in me." He turned to Astrid, looking down into her green eyes, seeing his entire future reflected there. "And to you, Astrid, I make the most sacred oath I am capable of making. I will love you, cherish you, protect you, and honor you for all the days of my life. I will be faithful to you in thought and deed. I will work alongside you to build the life we have dreamed of, and I will thank the gods every day that you chose to save a dying warrior in a snowstorm, rather than closing your door against the cold." Astrid's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "And I swear to you, Bjorn, that I will be the best wife I am capable of being. I will stand beside you in times of prosperity and hardship. I will support your endeavors, challenge you when you need challenging, and love you with all the strength of my heart. We will build a life together that honors both the peace-loving farmer and the honorable warrior, creating something new that combines the best of both worlds. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with eating and drinking, music and dancing, storytelling and laughter. Bjorn found himself the center of attention in a way that was completely different from the recognition he had received as a warrior. Men clapped him on the shoulder and offered advice on farming and household management. Women smiled knowingly at Astrid and whispered suggestions about married life. Children played games around the new dwelling that would soon be a true family home. As the stars emerged and torches were lit to continue the festivities, Bjorn and Astrid managed to steal a few moments alone, walking to the stream that ran through the property. The water sang over the stones, reflecting the firelight from the gathering, and the night air was pleasantly cool after the warmth of the day. "Are you happy?" Astrid asked, leaning against Bjorn's side as they stood by the water. "Does this life, so different from what you knew before, bring you contentment?" Bjorn wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I am happier than I have ever been," he replied with absolute sincerity. "My life as a warrior brought me recognition and a kind of hollow pride, but it never brought me joy or peace or the sense of belonging I feel here with you in this community. I would not trade this moment standing here with you beside our home for all the glory and plunder of 100 successful raids." "Good," Astrid said, tilting her face up to receive his kiss. "Because this is only the beginning. We have a lifetime ahead of us, Bjorn. A lifetime of building and growing, of facing challenges together, of creating something lasting and meaningful. And I cannot wait to begin." They kissed under the stars, holding each other close, while the sounds of celebration continued in the background. When they finally returned to the gathering, they found Astrid's father making arrangements for their wedding, which he announced would take place in 1 month's time, during the harvest festival when the entire community would gather again to celebrate the bounty of summer and the promise of autumn. The following weeks were a blur of final preparations. Astrid worked on creating her wedding dress, something special that would mark the occasion as one of the most important days of her life. Bjorn made the final touches to their home, ensuring everything would be perfect for when they began their married life together. The community contributed as well, with families offering gifts of livestock, household goods, and the accumulated wisdom of couples who had already walked the path Bjorn and Astrid were about to begin. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, with golden sunlight streaming across the valley and illuminating the landscape in shades of amber and green. The harvest had been bountiful that year, the fields yielding more grain than anyone could remember in recent seasons, and the community took this as a sign of the gods' favor upon the union about to take place. Families from all the scattered homesteads had arrived the previous evening, camping in tents and temporary shelters around Bjorn's property, transforming the quiet valley into a bustling village alive with activity and excitement. Bjorn had spent the night in his father-in-law's dwelling, following the tradition that bride and groom should not see each other on the morning of their wedding until the ceremony itself. He had barely slept, his mind too full of anticipation and joy to allow for rest. As dawn broke, the elder Bjorn had found him already awake, standing outside and watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Nervous?" the older man asked, coming to stand beside him with 2 cups of warm mead, offering one to Bjorn. "Not nervous exactly," Bjorn replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "More like overwhelmed by the reality that this is actually happening, that in a few hours Astrid will be my wife, and we will begin the life we have been planning and dreaming about for months. It feels almost too perfect, too good to be true after everything I have been through." The elder Bjorn nodded thoughtfully, sipping his mead and considering his words carefully before speaking. "I want to tell you something, Erickson. When you first arrived at my door, half dead and desperate, I had my doubts about you. I have lived long enough to know that warriors, even good ones, often carry darkness inside them that can poison everything they touch. I watched you carefully during your recovery, looking for signs of that darkness, ready to protect my daughter if I saw anything that concerned me." He paused, meeting Bjorn's eyes directly. But what I saw instead was a man capable of genuine transformation. Someone who recognized that the path he had been walking was leading nowhere meaningful, and who had the courage to choose differently. You embraced a completely new way of life, not because it was easy or familiar, but because you understood it was right. That takes a strength of character that has nothing to do with physical power or skill with weapons. The older man placed his hand on Bjorn's shoulder, a gesture that had become familiar over the months, a sign of acceptance and affection. I could not have chosen a better husband for my daughter if I had searched for years. You will make mistakes, because all men do, but I know your heart is true and your commitment to Astrid is absolute. That is all any father can ask for when giving his daughter to another man's care. Though truly, knowing my daughter, she will be caring for you as much as you care for her. This brought a smile to both men's faces, an acknowledgement of Astrid's independent spirit and strong will. I have no illusions about being the master of our household, Bjorn said with genuine amusement. Astrid is too intelligent and too capable to simply defer to my judgment on all matters. We will be partners, making decisions together, supporting each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. That is the kind of marriage I want, the kind I believe will bring us both happiness. That is exactly the right attitude, the elder Bjorn confirmed. My marriage to Astrid's mother was built on that same foundation of mutual respect and partnership, and it brought me more joy than I can possibly express. I see the same potential in your union with my daughter, and it brings me great peace to know she will be loved and valued as she deserves. As the morning progressed, Bjorn was helped to prepare for the ceremony by several of the men from the community. They had loaned him clothing appropriate for a wedding, fine wool dyed in deep earth tones, with embroidery along the hem, and cuffs that marked this as a special occasion. His hair and beard were carefully trimmed and groomed, and someone produced a silver arm ring that had been in their family for generations, offering it as a loan for the ceremony as a symbol of the wealth and status Bjorn would need to provide for his new family. Meanwhile, in a dwelling on the other side of the valley, Astrid was undergoing her own preparations surrounded by the women of the community. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of her own creation, white wool so finely woven it was almost translucent, decorated with intricate embroidery in shades of blue and green that echoed the colors of sky and forest. The other women helped arrange her auburn hair in an elaborate style, weaving in flowers and ribbons, creating a crown of natural beauty that would mark her as a bride. The ceremony itself was scheduled for midday, when the sun would be at its highest point, symbolizing the brightness of the future ahead. The location chosen was a clearing in the forest near Bjorn's homestead, a place where ancient trees formed a natural cathedral and a small stream provided the sound of running water, considered auspicious for new beginnings. As the appointed time approached, the entire community gathered in this sacred space, forming a circle around the area where the ceremony would take place. Bjorn was led to the clearing by the elder Bjorn and several other respected men from the community. He stood waiting, his heart pounding so hard he was certain everyone present must be able to hear it, his eyes fixed on the path where Astrid would appear. The assembled crowd grew quiet, an anticipatory hush falling over them like a physical presence. Then she appeared, and Bjorn forgot how to breathe. Astrid walked slowly along the forest path, her father beside her, sunlight filtering through the leaves above and creating patterns of light and shadow that made her seem almost otherworldly. Her dress flowed around her like water, the embroidery catching the light and seeming to shimmer with every step. Her face was radiant with happiness, her green eyes locked on Bjorn with an intensity that spoke of love and commitment and absolute certainty that this was right. As she reached the center of the circle where Bjorn waited, the elder Bjorn placed her hand in the younger man's, a symbolic transfer of responsibility and trust. "Care for her as I have cared for her," the older man said, his voice thick with emotion. "Love her as she deserves to be loved. Build a life with her that honors both of you and the community you are joining." "I swear it," Bjorn replied, his voice strong and clear, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "On my life and my honor, I swear it." The ceremony that followed was beautiful in its simplicity. Torsten, one of the oldest men in the community, and someone who had officiated at many weddings over the years, spoke about the nature of marriage, about partnership and commitment, about the responsibilities each person took on when joining their life to another's. He talked about the challenges they would face, the joys they would share, the importance of maintaining respect and communication even during difficult times. Then came the exchange of vows, the moment when Bjorn and Astrid would speak directly to each other before the assembled community, making promises that would bind them together for the rest of their lives. Bjorn went first, taking both of Astrid's hands in his and looking directly into her eyes as he spoke. "Astrid Bjornsdottir, I stand before you and before this community to pledge myself to you completely and without reservation. I vow to love you with all the strength of my heart, to honor you with my words and actions, to protect you from any threat that may arise, and to support you in all your endeavors. I promise to be faithful to you in thought and deed, to share with you my joys and sorrows, my strengths and weaknesses, holding nothing back. I vow to work alongside you to build a life of meaning and purpose, to raise our children with wisdom and love, to grow old with you and face whatever the future may bring with courage and unity. From this day forward, you are my wife, my partner, my greatest treasure. I am yours, now and forever. Tears streamed down Astrid's face as she listened to his words, but they were tears of pure joy. When it was her turn to speak, her voice was steady and strong, carrying clearly to all assembled. Bjorn Eriksson, I stand before you and before this community to pledge myself to you completely and without reservation. I vow to love you with all the devotion of my heart, to stand beside you through prosperity and hardship, to challenge you when you need challenging and support you when you need supporting. I promise to be your partner in all things, sharing equally in the work of building our household and our life together. I vow to give you children if the gods are willing, to create a home filled with warmth and laughter and love. I promise to see you not just as the warrior you were, but as the man you have become, and the man you continue to grow into. From this day forward, you are my husband, my companion, my truest love. I am yours, now and forever. Torsten produced 2 simple rings of silver, crafted by the community's metalworker specifically for this occasion. Following tradition, Bjorn placed one on Astrid's finger while she did the same for him, the circles of precious metal serving as physical symbols of the unbroken bond they were creating. Then, with Torsten's blessing and the approval of the assembled community, Bjorn drew Astrid into his arms and kissed her, a kiss that sealed their vows and marked the beginning of their married life. The celebration that followed was even more elaborate than the betrothal gathering had been. Tables practically groaned under the weight of food prepared by dozens of families, each contributing their specialties to create a feast worthy of the occasion. There was roasted venison and boar, fresh fish from the streams, breads of every variety, vegetables prepared in countless ways, honey cakes and berry tarts, and enough mead and ale to keep the festivities going well into the night. Music filled the air as those with instruments played traditional songs while others danced, their movements energetic and joyful. Children ran wild, stuffed with sweets and excited by the celebratory atmosphere. Elders sat together sharing stories and wisdom, comparing this wedding to others they had witnessed over the years. Young couples watched Bjorn and Astrid with a mixture of happiness for them and hope for their own futures. As evening approached and the celebration showed no signs of slowing, the elder Bjorn stood and called for attention. When the crowd had quieted, he raised his cup in a toast. "To my daughter Astrid and her husband Bjorn," he declared, his voice carrying across the gathering. "May your love grow stronger with each passing year. May your household prosper and your children be healthy and wise. May you face life's challenges together with courage and face life's joys together with gratitude. May you build a legacy that will be remembered for generations to come." To Bjorn and Astrid. To Bjorn and Astrid, the crowd echoed, raising their own cups and drinking deeply. As tradition dictated, as the sun began to set, the newly married couple was escorted to their home by the entire community, a procession marked by torchlight and continued singing. When they reached the dwelling Bjorn had built, the crowd remained outside while Bjorn lifted Astrid in his arms and carried her across the threshold, another tradition meant to bring good fortune to the marriage. Inside, the dwelling had been transformed by the women of the community. Flowers covered every surface, candles provided soft illumination, and the bed had been dressed with the finest linens and furs, creating a space that was both beautiful and welcoming. As Bjorn set Astrid on her feet, they could hear the crowd outside beginning to disperse, families making their way back to their campsites, giving the newlyweds the privacy they deserved. Finally alone, Bjorn and Astrid simply looked at each other for a long moment, hardly able to believe that after months of waiting and preparation, they were finally married, finally free to express the love they felt without restraint or restriction. Astrid reached up and cupped Bjorn's face in her hands, her touch gentle and reverent. "I love you," she whispered. "I have loved you since the moment I chose to pull you from the snow rather than close my door against the storm. You are everything to me, Bjorn. Everything." "And you are my salvation," Bjorn replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved my life that night, but you did more than that. You saved my soul. You showed me that I could be more than just a warrior, that I could build and create rather than destroy. You gave me hope when I had none, purpose when I was adrift, love when I felt I deserved nothing. You are my miracle, Astrid, and I will spend the rest of my life showing you how much that means to me." They came together then in a kiss that quickly deepened into passion, months of restrained desire finally finding release. Clothes were removed with trembling hands, revealing bodies that had been glimpsed but never fully seen, never touched with the freedom that marriage now granted. They explored each other with wonder and growing confidence, learning the landscape of skin and curve and muscle, discovering what brought pleasure and what brought gasps of delight. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, gentle and fierce, a physical expression of the emotional and spiritual bond they had forged. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed Bjorn had crafted, their bodies warm and satisfied, their hearts full of joy and contentment. Through the window, they could see the stars emerging in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first conversations, their courtship, and now their union as husband and wife. "What are you thinking?" Astrid asked, tracing patterns on Bjorn's chest with her fingertips, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her hand. "I am thinking about the strange path that brought me here," Bjorn replied thoughtfully. "If Thorvald had not decided to raid Jarl Arvid's territory, if we had not been ambushed, if I had not survived the battle and somehow made it this far north, if you had not chosen to open your door that night during the storm, any one of those things being different would have meant we never met, never fell in love, never built this life together. It seems impossible that so much suffering could lead to such perfect happiness, and yet here we are. Perhaps that is the nature of life," Astrid mused. "We cannot always see the purpose in our suffering when we are in the midst of it, but sometimes that suffering leads us to exactly where we need to be. Your old life had to die so that this new life could be born, and I am grateful for every moment of hardship you endured, because it brought you to me." They talked long into the night, making plans for their future, discussing dreams and hopes and practical matters like when to plant the winter crops and how many sheep they should aim to have in their flock by the following spring. They talked about children they hoped to have, names they liked, what values they wanted to instill. They talked about contributing to their community, about the responsibilities that came with being part of something larger than themselves. As sleep finally began to claim them, wrapped in each other's arms in the home they had built together, both felt a profound sense of peace and rightness. The journey that had begun with the dying warrior collapsing in a snowstorm had led to this moment of perfect happiness, to a love that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. In the days and weeks that followed, Bjorn and Astrid settled into married life with an ease that suggested they had been together for years rather than months. They worked side by side in the fields, harvesting the crops Bjorn had planted, preparing for winter. They cared for their growing flock of sheep, with Astrid teaching Bjorn the skills of animal husbandry she had learned from her father. They continued to strengthen their bonds with the community, hosting gatherings at their home, helping neighbors with tasks that required extra hands, becoming valued and respected members of the settlement. When the first snow fell that winter, nearly a year after Bjorn had collapsed at Astrid's door, they stood together outside their home and watched the white flakes drift down from the sky. Bjorn pulled his wife close, marveling at how different this winter was from the last, how he now faced the cold season with warmth and love and purpose rather than desperation and despair. "Thank you," he whispered into Astrid's hair as they stood there watching the snow. "Thank you for seeing past the broken warrior to the man I could become. Thank you for loving me, for believing in me, for building this life with me." Astrid turned in his arms and smiled up at him, her green eyes full of love and contentment. "Thank you for being brave enough to accept the help I offered, for being willing to transform yourself, for loving me as completely as I love you. We saved each other, Bjorn, and we will continue to do so every day for the rest of our lives." They kissed there in the falling snow, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, who had built from tragedy and hardship something beautiful and lasting. Inside their home, a fire burned warm and bright. Fields surrounded them that would yield crops in the spring. A community embraced them that would support them through whatever came. And most importantly, they had each other. a love forged in compassion and proved through dedication, a partnership that would endure for all the years to come. As they finally went inside, closing the door against the winter cold, both knew with absolute certainty that they had found their home, not just in a physical dwelling or a geographical location, but in each other. The girl who had helped a starving lone Viking had received far more than she gave, and the warrior who had stumbled to her door seeking only survival had found instead a reason to truly live. Together they had created something that would last beyond their own lifetimes, a legacy of love and transformation that would inspire their children and their children's children for generations to come. Their story, which had begun in darkness and desperation, had found its perfect ending in light and love, and the promise of a future filled with endless possibility.